The topic for today's lectures, which is lecture number 5, is project scope management. Yeah, project scope management under COMP1770. Let's look at the learning objective first for today. We need to describe the process of planning scope management. Explain the scope definition process and describe the contents of a project scope statement. Discuss methods for collecting and documenting requirements to meet stakeholders' needs and expectations. Next, discuss the process for creating a work breakdown structure using the analogy, top-down, bottom-up, and mind mapping approaches. Describe how software can assist in project scope management. Last not least, discuss consideration for agile or adaptive environment. So this is quite a long list of learning objectives that we should cover for this week. And if possible, I need to extend, if required, to next week. So with that, let's look at the project management approach, which we have seen this in the beginning of the lectures or in the beginning of the course, where we have to plan, do, check, and act. Yeah, so either PDCA or APDC. Yeah, so it is always in a cycle. This is what we call CIS, isn't it? Continuous improvement. Yeah, continuous improvement. We plan, we do, we check, and then we act. One need to be corrected, and so on. So project process improvement contribute to the success of project. So I believe all of you will be doing the same for your coursework or for your final year project, where you have a plan. And of course, one of the important tools is MS Project. So I really hope all of you will have that access to MS Project. Start your planning, list down all your tasks, list down who will be responsible for which task, how long, when you need to complete, what is the current progress, where are you, all that need to be included into the MS Project. So at one look at the MS Project Gantt chart, doesn't matter whether it is a top management or any of those stakeholders will be having good understanding on your project progress. Yeah, what are the activities, what are the steps, what are the approaches, strategies that you have put into your project, where are they, what are the status of each task or strategy plan, and then can do continue checking on the progress and also what action need to be taken and so on. And we can do continuous improvement to your plan. So with that, let's understand what is project scope management. Scope, yeah, the word scope is a very important element for project management. The scope, the word scope refers to all the work, remember, all the work involved in creating the product of the project and the processes used to create them. So there are two things here that you got to pay attention. One, you are trying to create a product out of your project. Normally for IT, it is a system, it is a software. And then what are the processes involved in creating them, right? So this is important. So all the work involved in creating the product of the project, which normally I refer to your system, software, and all the processes used to create them. This is what we call scope. So you need to set your scope correct in the beginning of the project. If your scope is wrong, definitely your product will be either incomplete. I won't say it will be completely wrong, but I might refer to incomplete product of the project, or you might have missed one or two processes that cause or produce incomplete product. So let's look at the details. A deliverable is a product produced, yeah, a product produced as part of a project, such as hardware or software, planning documents, meeting minutes, and many more. So all the work involved, that is important. That is what we call scope. And you must be very clear on your scope at the beginning of the project. Next, project scope management include the processes involved in defining and controlling what is or is not included in the project. So that is scope management. First, you define the scope. Next, you manage the scope. Ensuring that project team and stakeholders have the same understanding of what products the project will produce and what processes the project team will use to produce them. So make it very clear. I hope all of you will be very clear on these details. What product are you planning to produce and what activities or projects will produce what and what processes that the project team will use to produce them. That is very important. Even if you miss one process, you're going to have an incomplete product. That's the reason why we're asking you all to write a proposal, isn't it, for your project? So when you write a proposal, you actually cover your scope in your proposal. And then toward the end, we take your product and then we compare with your proposal, with your scope. What you so-called plan and so-called wish to have, yeah, are you delivering it? So we can do kind of comparison. So you have a statement at the bottom of this slide which says total scope, yeah, looking at the entire scope of your project is equivalent to or is same as you're looking at product scope plus project scope. Remember, product scope is the output of your all your work that you are performing, and the project scope is just the work related or the processes to create the product. So the combination of these two, all the processes plus the product of the project, we call total scope. So if anyone not very clear, still needs further clarification, either you drop your question at the chat box, which I will take a look later and I'll try to answer you, or you stop me and yeah, I can clarify now. Okay, with that, let's look at plan scope management. Plan scope management. So now we know what is scope management. Must have two things, isn't it? As you see in the earlier slide. Project scope management include the processes involved in defining and controlling. So defining and controlling what is and what is not included in a project. So once you understand what is scope management, let's plan for it. What is plan scope management? The process of developing a plan that includes the total scope of what needs to be done and what is excluded from the project. So sometimes the excluded from the project, we include as a assumption or exclusion, so that the marker or your project supervisor will not question you. He fully understand the scope of your project. Implementation and validation of the scope and how to control deviation from the scope management. So scope is very important and all of you need to plan your scope. So you yourself will be very clear what you need to produce and what are the processes required in order to produce those output. So product scope is outputs the team will deliver to its customer. Remember, what we're going to deliver to the customer is normally system, software. For example, if you're going to do a, let's say, facial recognition system, artificial intelligence uh, with additional features or advanced features, facial recognition system. So that is your product, software, isn't it? Of course, in detail, we have to look into all the functionality of your project or product. and compare with your proposal, right? Your proposal also got to be to some details, to some extent, so that we can compare and do a check whether what you propose is what you're delivering. Otherwise, the customers will not be happy with you, isn't it? Because this is what we promise them. So-called, we guarantee them upfront for their payments. Uh, Next, let's look at project scope. Like what we have discussed, the work needed to be performed in order to deliver the project output. So all the processes in detail, all the processes, all the activities, all the tasks, and this is what you will have in your task in your Gantt chart, so that you don't miss out anything. You list out. So for those who are doing project or even your coursework, coursework can be a very simplified project. You need to list out all the activities that you need to perform, yeah, as part of your project scope, and prioritize them. We will discuss about prioritization later. Prioritize them so that you know which need to be done by who and when, and what is the priority. So make sure all of you, every one of you, understand the plan scope management, and it consists of two: product scope and project scope. They are not the same. It's both are combined in order to produce the total scope, as what we have seen earlier, isn't it? The formula here, so-called the formula or the statement here. Total scope equal to product scope plus project scope. Okay, next we're going to look at the processes in terms of scope management, but we're going to look at the processes. What are the main processes in getting all your work done? One, planning scope management, in determining how the project scope and requirements will be managed. Yeah, will be managed, especially requirements, system requirement, project requirement, collecting requirement, defining and documenting the features and function of the products produced during the project, as well as the processes used for creating them. So we will discuss in some detail later in the coming slide how we're going to collect your requirements, what are the methods. Yeah, so we will discuss that in detail. So we have to define and document the features and function of product produced during the project. Defining scope, defining the scope. Earlier we planned, then we also plan how to collect and how to document. Now how to define the scope itself. Reviewing the project charter. Remember, we have come out with a project charter in previous lectures. Requirement document and organizational process asset to create scope statement. So basically, you need to know the entire things. What product are you planning to generate out of this project? What are the processes involved in producing that particular product? Like what I used to refer, in order to develop the system, what are the processes are required. So in detail, technically, what we will do, we will go through all the system analysis techniques in order to come out with all the processes, define all the processes in detail, so that all that can be documented properly as part of your project documentation. One requirement is also creating the WBS, work breakdown structure, subdividing the major project deliverables into smaller, more manageable components. I'm very sure many of you have seen or have experienced how to create WBS. You have to create this for your coursework as well as for your project. Basically, you are taking your major project and then you divide into smaller sub components so that you manage component by component. End of the day, you manage merging of all the components into one big system or product. So this is what we call WBS. So once we have defined the scope, creating the WBS, we have to validate, validating scope. Basically, we are formalizing acceptance of the project deliverable. This where we have like user acceptance tests plus other tests that you need to carry out, or I will say activities or processes that you need to carry out in order to get a acceptance from the user, from the stakeholders. So we call all that activities as validating scope. And finally, remember it consists of two, what and controlling. Controlling changes to project scope throughout the life of the project. So that can be done under act or review stage, where you might need to do some changes to your project to make sure it is deliverable to customers as what they have requested. So these are the main processes under the scope management: planning, collecting requirement, defining the scope, creating the WBS, validating the scope, and continue to control the scope. A quick update on what we call media snapshot. Any inaccurate requirement gathering can cause continuous what we call project failure, right? Inaccurate requirement. So we don't want to run into this problem, isn't it? This is just a note for you, a note for you. Don't collect the wrong requirement or information, or don't what we call miss any requirements. Because if you do that or if you run into this, it can cause project failure, right? For example, you have a statement for every pound spent on project and programs, 5.1% is wasted due to poor requirement management. So the requirement management for your project or even for your coursework right now for this particular subject is very important. That is the reason why when you form your group, discuss among your group members again and again, make sure your requirements are correct. And also it's good to check with your supervisors during your tutorial sessions. Your requirements are almost complete or did you miss out any requirement? So in the next couple of slides, what we're going to do, check, or we're going to go through some methods, or some discussion on what we call what is correct requirement and how to perform or carry out this process or task known as correct requirement. Make sure the project team is absolutely clear on the project objective. So that is also one of your requirement in your project proposal, where you need to come out with clear project objective. We will discuss about this again along the way on project objective. So let's take a look at requirement. What is requirement? A condition or capability needed by a user to solve a problem or achieve an objective that satisfy a standard, specification, or any other formally documented need. Yeah, so that is requirement. So normally what we do when you work in a more real world, there will be a so-called standard, or we call it SOP, SOP, standard operating procedures, or best practices. Sometimes we do call best practices. It is quite easy nowadays, not like those days. Nowadays, in every industry, in every company, we have what we call best practices, which is quite easy to obtain either from the audit company or from the audit requirement. So based on the audit requirement, we look for the requirement. We check thoroughly in detail what is the condition, or what are the condition, or what kind of capability that we have or needed to solve a problem or achieve the objective of the project. right? So that is what we call requirement. So it is very important. Don't take it lightly, the requirement, because if you miss any of the condition or standard or best practices, you will end up with the incomplete product. Next, we're going to discuss about collect requirements. What is collect requirement? So once we understand clearly what is requirement, then we need to start the task or the job of how to collect requirements, or we call it requirement gathering, a systematic effort to understand and analyze stakeholders' needs. See, that is the key word, stakeholders' needs, to define and document these needs and requirement with a focus on meeting project objective. So project objectives are very important. Don't go out of project's objective. So all of you, before you even start collecting your requirement, you have to understand clearly, yeah, like what they say, absolutely clear on project objective. If your supervisor asks you what are the project objective, you must be very clear. Of course, you don't have to memorize, but you must be very clear. What is your aim? What is your goal? Why are you doing this project? What are the objectives that you want to achieve end of the day? So with that, your requirement and collection of requirement or requirement gathering will be much more easier. I hope I have made it very clear on what is requirement and why we need to collect requirement, or what is collect requirement. It is a systematic effort to understand and to analyze stakeholders' need. That is the keyword. Okay, please. Next, we're going to look at stakeholders' input and need. Remember, like I said earlier, this is the keyword. So what the stakeholders is looking at, yeah, and what feedback or input that they provide to you, so that you can do proper or almost perfect or complete requirement collection, or collecting requirement or information gathering. There are several ways. I really hope this will help you for your coursework as well as for your project. There are several ways, methods of information gathering. One is interviewing stakeholders. Interview, as we have covered those days from your diploma level itself. One of the common method is interviewing stakeholders. The details about interviewing we can discuss separately, but that is one of the important or critical method, interviewing stakeholders, where you need to make appointment, you need to inform the stakeholders when, how many of you going to meet. You need to prepare some questions, if possible, upfront and share with the stakeholders. So when they come for the interviewing sessions, they know and they are prepared, yeah, to provide you information that you're looking for. Holding focus group and facilitated workshop. That is also another method where you can identify some people from the organization or stakeholders, like what we discussed last week, internal, external, yeah, and we form a group, and then we carry out meetings on a specified frequency, or even workshop with them, so that we can get all the requirements or information that we are looking for. Holding focus group, using group creativity and decision-making technique. So once you have the group, you can get all their feedbacks, your opinions, as well as if there's any information they need to make use in order to make decision making. That will be good for you. Utilizing questionnaires and survey. The other methods are questionnaires, where you can carry out an online survey. Is quite easy nowadays. So you can do questionnaires beside interviewing, having focus group, You also can create or can use another technique which is known as a questionnaires or surveys. Next, you can also do observation studies. Another method, observation studies. Observation can be carried out at the current office, current environment, or future environment, if it is available, and observe how they carry out things. For example, if it is in a manufacturing environment, you observe how the operators are performing their duties on daily basis, on shiftly basis, looking at the technicians, what they do on hourly basis or shiftly basis. Note down everything, observe everything in detail and write it down. The whole idea is to do improvement, to improve the current working methods or current techniques into a better method. Generating ideas by comparing specific project practices or product characteristic. So we can do some kind of what we call benchmarking. Once you have all this information from the earlier technique, either from interview, meeting, questionnaires, observation, then you can start generating ideas by comparing, or we do call benchmarking. Then you also can compare with or can refer to best practices, SOPs, standard. Definitely we want to be better if possible, or as close to best practices. We also need to do some research. Reference documents is also part of the collecting requirement. Either you look at what we call primary document or secondary document. Also required to do some market analysis, competitive analysis, so that we are current what we're going to produce as the project product is sellable in the future, is needed in the future. No point creating something that will not sellable, will not sellable in the future, which has no demand in the future. We don't want to do that. Definitely, we want to do something that will last long, a couple of years in the future. So you have to do market analysis and competitive analysis for your project, right? That is very important. So we IT guys, definitely you need to study, understand what kind of market analysis or competitive analysis that we can do. Remember some of the technique that we covered earlier, like NPV, net present value, yeah, ROI, all that methods are more to technical. Definitely you need to do some market analysis and competitive analysis, whether your product and your project are really needed in the next 5 years, for example, 3 years or 5 years, or even longer. Yeah, it depends on your product. Last not least, we also need to do what we call SWOT analysis, where we need to look at different factors along this analysis, such as strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat, which we will discuss later. Also, one of the requirement, very important requirement for your project. And normally we do this at the beginning of the project stage itself, so that we understand our project clearly before we moving on with into more details. All right. Okay, with that, let me continue to the next slide. If there is no question from any one of you, we have covered details or information about stakeholders analysis in quite extended format last week. I hope some of you still can remember what we have discussed last week, such as to identify key holders or key stakeholders. And also we need to know who are the decision makers as the team or as part of the stakeholders, those with political influence, those affected most by project. This is what we discussed last week. So you need to understand who or which group, part of the key stakeholders are important decision makers, and those who have political influencer, and those who will be mostly affected by the project. Upon completion of the project, those who will be affected by the project. All this we discussed last week. And also we discussed their needs, stakeholders' needs, every one of them, either internal or external. Remember, I hope you are still remember this. Otherwise, please go through it again. If there are any conflict among the stakeholders, feedback and input, then we need to prioritize. We did discuss that last week, right? How to prioritize and what need to prioritize. And one of the tools that we were discussing last week is also known as a RACI matrix that we wanted to come out with, or we should come out with RACI matrix for your project. Responsible, accountable, consult, and inform matrix. I have shown a number of examples to you last week, and there is one example here. What you can do, you take all the primary tasks, important jobs that need to be performed for your project, and then you list out under the names who are responsible, who are accountable, who need to be consulted, and who need to be informed. So once you have this matrix chart, then I'm very sure all the people or stakeholders, those comes under the category of who are the influencer, who are the most important people, who are the people who will be mostly affected. All of them are understood, and they are consulted or they are informed of your project. That is the whole idea of having a RACI metric. As a project manager or as a team of the project, we have too many things to be carried out on our hand. So charts like this or metrics like this will be really helpful. So we can include this chart into our task list, into a Gantt chart, and then we can consider this is done. So meaning when it is done, you have informed all the people responsible, accountable, who need to be consulted, who need to be informed of all these tasks. So we have discussed this last week, and just to refresh all of you, this is one of the important metrics to make sure all the stakeholders are properly taken care. Next, we're going to move on our discussion on prioritization of the requirement. So now we understand what is requirement, how to collect requirement, what are the techniques that we can use to collect requirements, who are the stakeholders, why we need to cover the stakeholders, because we need to know from whom we need to get the input and feedback, whom we need to inform, whom we need to understand or identify as responsible and accountable. So when we cover all the stakeholders, everyone is informed properly about your project. So no one will really complain or no one will really provide negative feedback. Then you can continue with your collection of requirement, and next you need to do prioritization of the requirement. So before we do prioritization of your requirement, you need to understand why we need to prioritize, right? I think this is not a difficult topic to understand. reason you guys are doing prioritization even in your normal daily life. Because if you're trying to do everything at one go or at the same time, even though you have a team or members in your group, you will not be able to do everything. You don't have enough time to do everything. So for that reason, for that simple reason, you have to prioritize. Not enough resources to do everything. You don't have time to do everything. You don't have enough resources to do everything. So you have to prioritize it, which need to be done first, next, and so on. Next, lack of money or lack of people or both, in terms of resources. Resources, as you understand, can be hardware, software, dataware, peopleware, and so on. Yeah, all the uh, resources that you require in carrying out all your works related to your project. So you have the whole list in your Gantt chart. You need to understand, and then you need to prioritize so that you will not run into lack of money or lack of people in performing those tasks. Next, what we will do, we also will cover one technique which I mentioned to you last week. We call it Moscow, means important things are done first. So we will look at these techniques shortly. Yeah, what is Moscow technique and how to carry this out so that it helps you in your prioritization. Moscow prioritize drive sequence of delivery. So Moscow technique can be used in identifying or in helping you, assisting you in prioritization. Because you might ask question, isn't it? How to prioritize? What method to use, what technique to use, what criteria to use, what factors to look for to prioritize your project or your task. So that's the reason why we have a method which is known as a Moscow. Let's look at that. What is Moscow prioritization technique? All right. If anyone has any question, please stop me, speak, or put it into the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to continue with what we call Moscow prioritization. All right. The first M and O, small o, must have for requirement that are fundamental to system. Fundamental to system means to produce your product, to carry out all the work. Must have. So that's why they put the M, must have for requirement that are fundamental to the system. Or we call it minimum usable subset. Guaranteed. Must have. Remember, these are the job, these are the processes, these are the tasks that you must perform if you want to have that product. For example, product A. You want to have product A in your coursework, in your project, you must do all these activities, all these tasks, all these processes. That is number one. Number two, should have. S, the S, MOS, should have for important requirement that would probably be classed as mandatory in less time in constrained environment. It is an important task, but not vital. Not must, but it is important. May be painful to leave out, but solution still available or viable. So this one you should have is like recommended requirement to make your product better, isn't it? Should. That is the second category. The first category or first is a must requirement. Second is a should have requirement or important requirement. In other words, important. Next, could have requirement that can more easily be left out of the increment and could, could have. But you can easily be left out if less impact or it is not required, that is okay. So it's like a suggestion. Could have included, could have requirement, right? So you must, first category is must, second category should, third category could, and the last one is won't have this time around. For those valuable requirements that can wait until later development takes place. Why we include this? Because normally there will be questions from the stakeholders. Why don't you include this? Why don't you consider this? Are you planning to have this? Are you planning to include this into your project? Due to the time limit, because every project comes with a constraint, time and investment, money here. So you might plan something, but you cannot perform this round, or you cannot carry out this round, or you cannot include that into your project this round. But to be a smarter or smart project manager, you must have that list in your hand so that if anyone asks, you can always answer them. Yes, we already think about it. We might have this in the next stage or in the next round. Not this round due to budget in investment or time constraints and so on, or even any other resources. So these are what we call Moscow prioritization. First category must have, second category should, third category could have, and then won't have. I hope I make it very clear. So please include Moscow technique, prioritization technique into your coursework, into your project. This is required, required for your coursework and for your project. Any question, guys? So what you need to do now is you need to take a look at your project, take a look at your coursework, write down which are the tasks must, which are the tasks should, which are the tasks could, which are the tasks will not included into your coursework or project. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide before we take a short break. What we call Moscow rules and 80-20 rule. I'm very sure many of you are aware of 80-20 rule. 80-20 rules are being used in many areas, many industries, many sectors. So it is the same. They are being used, or we are using it in our what we call task prioritization areas or factors. Yeah. For example, instead of we put maximum 100% total effort, like what you can see on your left hand side, maximum 100% total effort, we can also consider what we call maximum 80% of total effort, maximum 60% of total effort. But looking at the Moscow, we know that we have category of tasks or processes that must have, should have, could have, and won't have. Won't have, we don't have to consider because we are not going to put any effort onto that, right? So must have, should have, and could have. These are the three main categories. So what we do, as you saw here, minimum usable subset, MUST, must. Remember, must. Minimum usable subset, which stand for MUST, or MUST stand for minimal usable subset, guaranteed that you will include all these requirements into your project is what is our focus. So what we can do, we can focus 80% of our effort, yeah, if possible, 80% of our effort into this 20% of minimum usable subset. So we take the 80% of our effort and we apply into this 20% of our must usable subset or must have. The rest we can pay less attention, or we can use the balance 20%, for example, or the balance effort to get it done. But the must have is the priority. Yeah. So that goes into what we call business case The 80% effort goes into the main business case, and the rest we can consider as a contingency plan. Could have considered as a contingency or backup plan. So must and should often delivers 80% of total business benefit. That is what we plan and wish to deliver to the customers. The could have, we can always prepare as a backup to make the customer happy, isn't it? Let's say you complete your project earlier, you still have some room for improvement or to do some additional tasks, then you can look into could have, because this is your backup on hand to be included so that your customer will be happy when they see this. They won't question you, hey, why you did not include all this? So that is the whole idea of 80-20 rule, following the Moscow rules or Moscow prioritization technique. Okay, guys, before we take a break, short break of 10 minutes, any question? Any question?
Sir, it's about the coursework actually.
I didn't get your question again.
Sir, it's about the coursework. I reviewed back. Actually, the coursework stated that we can use the Excel to do the Gantt chart.